So, it's a pleasure to be here. Do I have a microphone? It is a pleasure, indeed. And I want to thank you all for coming and for staying, and despite the fact that you must be very hungry by now, staying until now. And I prepared something called Apparatus of Epistemic Dissent. I will skip a lot of stuff so that, but I'll touch the most important things I wanted to talk about. So I took your title quite seriously. Something about wild connectivity, and what I planned, which I might not be able to do completely today, but I'll share the paper with you. It's a kind of a wild connection of different things that are going on in my mind. And the other part about other worlds, I also try to touch and question. So I would start with a disclaimer saying that, of course, there is no claim towards some kind of wholesomeness in what I have to say, or rectilinearity. It's just what it is. So I'll start with two anecdotes. The first one is about this guy you're seeing here. He's called Anton Wilhelm Amo. So I chose to talk about this guy because in German history of philosophy, he is completely absent. He's off the picture. It's very important to talk about him because in 1734, he wrote a PhD with the title, I just have to look for it since I'm skipping, on the apathy of the human mind, or the absence of sense and of the faculty of sensing in human mind, and the presence of these in organic and living body. So this is very important because somehow it plays a role in my practice, you know, thinking about the embodied mind, you know, going away from the duality of the mind and body. But also, I find it very interesting to talk about him because I'm interested in processes of erasure. So there's a paper, actually I stumbled on this guy a couple of years ago. I had known about his work, and I struggled to find information about him, but little was found about him. And I read an article on the New York Times philosophy blog called The Stone, and this guy called Justin E.H. Smith was wondering, how come at the time when Anton Wilhelm Amo lived and did this brilliant philosophical work, at that same time, 10 years after, Hume wrote a paper saying that he cannot imagine somebody, a so-called Negro, being intelligent in any way. And we have a lot of things that came after that because Kant and Hegel followed suit. I don't want to get into that, but what I'm interested in is the fact that this guy who came into Germany as a slave at the age of 3 and studied and became it's known until now that he's the first philosophy professor of color. So 1734 he became a professor, and he's mentioned rarely anywhere, but his work influenced, you know, the lives of Hegel that came, you know, a long time after him. So I'm interested in this process of erasure. So I skip to the next point. A magazine called Abia. Abia was founded in 1963 in Cameroon by a collective of intellectuals, but foremost Bernard Fonlon. And the idea was to do a Pan-African magazine. You know, and he said something, I have a quote here, he said, now and again, each community throws up from amongst its masses individuals with special gifts of head and heart and hand. Individuals who, because they see further and deeper into themselves and into their world, individuals who, because they feel more keenly, more rudely, the thrill of communal joy, the shock of communal tragedy, individuals who, because they are gifted with language and lasting beauty, become, as it were, the mouthpiece of the zeitgeist. So what is important in this is, this magazine was built with the intention of putting culture at the forefront of nation building. So this is about the point of independence. So this is 3 years after the Cameroonian independence, and they came up with this magazine. And what they did was to do a serious networking of people that wanted to think about Africa. So from the Caribbean, from Asia, from the Americas, from Europe, of course, inviting them to contribute articles. So again, I'm showing this as something that is going on through my mind. And because I came in contact with this publication quite early on as a teenager, not because I was very much interested in culture, but because I found them at my parents' library. And then when I founded the space in Berlin called Savvy Contemporary, one of the first things I did almost instinctively was to go back to Cameroon and look for these journals. Again, the issue of archiving comes up because you do not find them anywhere. You know, most people in my generation didn't know about it. You went to bookshops and nobody had even heard about it. So what I had to do was to go into private houses to look for them, you know, to try to at least digitalize them and make them accessible to the public. So this brings me then, of course, to Savvy Contemporary, which, as Ekaterina already mentioned before, is a space I founded in 2009, and it's a completely, almost completely non-funded space. We don't have any structural funding, so there is once in a while we get some project funding for certain projects, but 1 or 2 months, and then you don't have any money. But then we try to do what we have to do. So it's called the Laboratory of Form Ideas, and so I actually named how do I play here? So it just. Okay, I just looked through. So I brought in, actually named this talk, the Apparatus of Epistemic Dissent, based on something Katie King had talked about called the Apparatus of Literary Production. So again, this kind of intersection that happens because we're interested in not only in arts, but also in different technologies. Having a background as a biotechnologist, we're interested a lot in language and so on and so forth. So, but most especially we're interested in what I would like to call, you know, the politics of knowledge. You know, who decides on what to talk about? What kind of discourses do people produce, especially within the cultural field? You know, and we come with a certain stance. That we don't want to swim, we don't want to ride on certain waves. We come with the kind of discourses that we think important. You know, we come with what Michel Roth-Trio would call knowledge from the South Atlantic. You know, as opposed to what is happening in the North Atlantic. So we're interested in philosophies, of course, from the North, but we're interested, of course, in a bigger and older philosophy that comes from the South. That is what we want to propose. So to be able to illustrate what I'm talking about, I brought actually a poem by a Jamaican poet called Kaimila, and it's a whole book called The Cartographer Tries to Map the Way to Zion. And it's very interesting, and I would like to read through it if I have the time. And it's at 1, in which the cartographer explains himself. You might say, my job is not to lose myself exactly, but to imagine what loss might feel like. The sudden creeping pace, the consultation with trees and bloom might prove a landmark. My job is to imagine the widening of the unfamiliar and also the widening ache of it. To anticipate ironic questions. How did we find ourselves here? My job is to untangle the tangled, to unworry the concerned, to guide you out from cul-de-sacs into which you may have wrongly turned. 2, in which the Rastaman disagrees. The Rastaman has another reasoning. He says, now that man's job is never straightforward or easy. His work is to make thin and crushable all that is big and as real as ourselves. Is to make flat all that is high and rolling. Is to make invisible and worthless plenty things that poor people can't do without, like board houses and the corner shop from which Miss Katie sell her famous peanut porridge. And then again, the map maker's work is to make visible all them things that should have never exist in the first place, like the conquest of pirates, like borders, like the viral spread of governments. So again, I chose this because of the kind of power play that happens here, you know, this dispute between the kind of a Western science and, you know, another kind of non-Western way of thinking, Western epistemology. So, it is the friction between the exactness and rationality of what is termed science against the experiential, empirical, and phenomenological. This encounter betrays the figure's relations to and the entanglements between the concepts of nations and races, but also the liaison between language and knowledge, language and land. So it's also obvious that the encounter between the cartographer and the Rastaman is also a metaphorical struggle between Babylon and Zion. So, Ekaterina mentioned something about diversity. We do not talk about diversity of peoples, we talk about diversity of knowledges. And we use it in the plural. So, Sami Contemporary is a space of epistemological diversity. A space that embodies Boaventura de Sousa Santos' postulation that another knowledge is possible, and vying to his arguments that there is no social justice without global cognitive justice. As de Sousa Santos states, the exclusions, oppressions, and discriminations produced by global capitalism have not only had economic, social, and political effects upon the world, but have also had detrimental cultural and epistemological effects. You know, and which is what I think Chen was mentioning earlier on, the way we kind of self-colonize ourselves, you know, because of the kind of knowledge systems we inherit. Thus, the urge not only to acknowledge the specificity and diversity of our epistemologies, but to resist the tendency to universalize Western epistemologies. And then I'll skip again. Here I write about the singularity of, the necessity or the need to use knowledge in its plurality, which is based on something we talk about very much at Savi, based on writings from Louis Gordon. You know, so he says the mere fact that in the English language knowledge is used in the singular, you know, is a proof of the colonial aspect of knowledge. You know, because it is suggesting that there can only be one knowledge. You know, that's where we break with that. So we are also very much interested in the culture of referencing. You know, I'll read a bit of it and I'll talk about it. So the culture of selective referencing, the culture of selective canonization, the culture of legitimization, of who reserves the right to legitimize and who does not get legitimized. Because as much as we cite references from scholarship circles, we also cultivate what we call the academia of the fireside. That is, all those stories, folk tales, recitations narrated around the fireside as our own legitimate sources of reference. The idea hereby is not to create another parallel canon, but to decanonize the notion of the canon as a whole. So by choosing embodied practices as mediums and formats of discourse and knowledge, we delink from the conventional referencing phenomena and propose a more phenomenological approach of dealing with history, memory, and knowledge at large. So one of the things we talk about when we work at Savi is we call Savi a Njangi house. Njangi house is something in Cameroon where people just come, they get together. It's a drinking spot, it's an eating spot. You know, when we do exhibitions, we make food as well. So again, looking at the images Chen showed earlier, you know, how do you archive these things? How do you curate these things? And so it is part and parcel of the curatorial process. You know, so I remember in 2010, one of the first articles that people, some journalists wrote about Slavic contemporary. They got into the exhibition space and it was stinking of food, you know. But that was exactly what we wanted, you know, because that part is very essential to the kind of art we want to show, you know. 2 years, 3 years after, sometimes they were even writing about the food and not writing about the art, you know. So again, that kind of switch happened. So, an important part of our culture of swimming against the stream at Slavic Contemporary is working extradisciplinarily. By inviting agents from different geographical and social spheres and differing disciplines, such as biotechnologists, art historians, cultural theorists, anthropologists, and you name the rest, we think interdisciplinary work is not enough. We must be able to liberate ourselves from the tight corset of one's own discipline. Thus, when Edouard Glissant talks about not leaving history in the hands of historians alone, he indeed does a call for extradisciplinarity. So as a plumber, a physician, or a poet, one has the right also to write one's own history. This is our understanding also of what Lewis Gordon means when he so articulately talks about the theological suspension of disciplines. You know, he talks about the concept of disciplinary decadence. You know, those philosophers that see themselves as philosophers, and if you were not trained as a philosopher, you're not allowed to take part in this. You know, we break that. We break those boundaries, and we say you don't need to be, you don't need to have a PhD in philosophy to be able to discuss what we want to talk about. So, by thinking interdisciplinarily, we acknowledge the limits and faults of our disciplines and advocate for processes of unlearning to be able to learn something anew. So, unlearning here is not forgetting, it is not deletion, cancellation, nor burning off. It is writing bolder and writing anew. It is commenting and questioning. It is giving new footnotes to old and other narratives. It is the wiping off of the dust, clearing of the grass, cracking of the plaster that lays above the arrays. Unlearning is flipping the coin and awakening the ghost. Unlearning is looking in the mirror and seeing the world rather than a concept of universalism or any form of hegemony. So we did a big project on learning the given, which was inviting, you know, thinkers and practitioners from around the world to come to Berlin and talk about their process of unlearning. And for that, we also invited a lot of performance artists, you know, to think with us about how you can use the body also as an unlearning mechanism, you know. So, and also part of that was inviting 6 DJs to play the night through, to also unlearn by dancing. We also concern ourselves with issues of language. Also very interesting that there was a discussion about language and languages earlier on. So language, finding the right words to express what we want to talk about in the way we want to talk about them without the limitations of an inherited universal language, is of course always an issue in an age of coloniality. Shifting the boundaries of language is thus a trial to find a language to express thoughts that cannot necessarily be expressed in colonial languages like English, French, Spanish, or German, which through their hegemonic structure and embedded hierarchical systems in relation to knowledge might not be able to articulate certain philosophies and worldviews. As a consequence, we research into languages and invest into ways of life like Pidgin, Patois, Creole, as possibilities of articulating the knowledges we concern ourselves with. Also, especially because of the ability to stand out as syncretic languages, with their legacy as languages of resistance, the ability to embody, express, and disseminate subversivity and negotiate identities. Pidginization, as a way of being, also means commoning. So, from the Slavic contemporary perspective, commoning also stands for collaboration, for co-working, for co-production, for co-creation, and for in collectivity. This should be understood as a concept of radical sharing. This sharing goes beyond the physical as we look into the concept of a collective mind and the noosphere, again as key. So, just to say that, again, of course, I have to speak in English here, to communicate broader. But then, how do we escape this kind of, you know, fixed language structures, you know? So how do we experiment with that? And something we've done is to invite poets, musicians that sing in Pidgin, that work with Pidgin, you know, and other, you know, kind of syncretic languages, you know. So that is what we do. So there's a long chapter here called If Baldwin Was Right, where I look at an article that Baldwin had written called The Creative Process, which again I will skip to be able to meet up with the time. But I'll use this opportunity to show you a couple of projects we did just this year because I couldn't show any much more. This is a song exhibition we did with the Cameroonian filmmaker called Jean-Pierre Bekolo. It was called Welcome to Applied Fiction, where he completely questioned the process of filmmaking. This piece, installation is called Return to Sender. So he came to Berlin as a DAAD fellow, and what he did when he was invited was to go to the Marché Mokolo, a big market in Cameroon, and he bought a lot of second-hand clothes and brought them to Germany. So he's bringing them back to the sender. So, you know, he talked, so in this wheel, so that wheel was constructed for the exhibition, you could stand in there like the lady, and it was like a hamster's wheel. So the process of watching film, he says, why do you have to sit down to watch film? Motion picture, so you also have to be in motion to be able to watch motion picture properly. So the service space is in a former crematorium. So you see, this is where the urns used to be. So we use them all as video spaces. So you had 12 videos of Jean-Pierre Bekolo, excerpts of works that he showed there. So we're also very much interested in archival processes, no? But what does that mean? Like this structure you see here is based on a unit called mutant matters. You know, it's supposed to be an archival unit. So you see there are chairs, but they're first and foremost books. So we question what the book should be. So the chairs, they have an ISBN number, so you can get them actually as a book format. So this is a PCT called Viewing. You know, again, saying, so he calls it the cinema of everyday life. You know, in Cameroon, you walk on the streets, and people don't want to buy newspapers, so they go to the kiosk, and this is how you have the newspaper. So they just read like this and they pass by. So he says that's also a kind of a cinematic process. So this is another exhibition we did called What the Tortoise Murmurs to Achille, on laziness, economy of time, and productivity. So but again, not staying within that kind of concept of the right to be lazy, which is again a kind of a bourgeois stance. You know, it's more than that. You know, who gets, because the point of departure again for this exhibition was a statement. It is said that Merkel made that statement when there was a big Greek crisis. They said, oh, but it's obvious that there's a Greek crisis because those guys in the south, in any case, are very lazy. You know, so they wanted to talk about this concept of laziness, you know, because even in the heart of slave trade, the guy tilling the soil outside was called lazy, you know, but then how is it lazy as compared to you standing there and watching him till the soil, you know? So we want to question that concept of laziness. So this is a piece by Maria Ioro and Rafael Cuomo about Italian migrants that came as Gastarbeiter to Switzerland, and some that came to Germany also as Gastarbeiter. Junobum Park, an artist from Korea, with these puzzle pieces. Skip. Abraham Ogobase, you know, talking about the residency. You know, this is very, you know, actually a beautiful thing. But again, artists that go out on the residency somewhere and they don't know what to do with their lives. Avec a questioning time, you know, the concept of the ruler, you know, the now and the end. He did the secular ruler, he did a couple of that time. So erasure again. What about the story of the writer? What about the story the writer would have written on the day after he died? Abifuri. So this is an exhibition we did in the summer. I'll just do it very fast. called The Incarnation of the Disquieting Muse, you know, on divinity, super-realities, on the exorcisement of witchery. So we're invited by the Goethe Institute to do this project, you know, on the bigger framework of something called African Futures, you know. So basically, they were giving us money to do it. But the question at the core was, are we thinking about the same African futures? You know, I don't know if I'm thinking about the same African future like the Goethe Institute, you know. So I wanted to take a step back to think about another kind of African future, which lies maybe in something you call witchcraft, you know. And again, a kind of a perversion of that concept, you know. And you know, looking at concepts of witchery through an economic prism, through a political, through a social, through whatever prism, you know. Harris Epaminonda. Again, also enlarging the concept of Africa, you know, because you know, we've left behind that concept of Africa as a geographical space, because we are actually in Africa as well. Bulebwese Siwani, Mkal, Marco Montiel Soto of Venezuela, Joshua Diego, what's his name again? Luis Henderson. George Singer. And a couple of others. So this is the current exhibition. I think it just finished last weekend. This finishes this weekend. Come from Bandung to Berlin, curated by If All the Moons Align, curated by Brigitte Isabel and Renan Larouane. Again, taking the Bandung conference as a point of departure to create various narratives, real and fictional narratives. So you had archive materials from Bandung itself, but also from research projects they had done in Hong Kong, and from magazines like the New Philippines, but also creating fictional narratives in between. So I will call it a day with this. So thank you very much for listening.